Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show. I am Patrick Daugherty, joined today by Kyle Dvorchak and some special guests as we get ready to preview the NFC South. We are joined off the top by I can't speak English anymore, by the Charlotte Observer's Mike Kaye, who is on the Carolina Panthers beat. And then we will be joined by Fantasy Life's Ian Hartitz to break down the rest of the division. You may know the teams as the Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But yeah, Mike, the Panthers, I swear I know the English language. Against all odds, the Panthers are the most interesting team in the division this year. But that begins with one really huge question, maybe the biggest question mark in the entire NFL. And then as I swear I can speak. 2023 number one overall pick, Bryce Young, had one of the worst rookie seasons for any first-round quarterback this century last year, really for any rookie quarterback, period. Kind of depending on what metric you go by, like what Pro Football Reference slider you use. So we all know the first and last mission for the team this year is to save Bryce Young's career. They brought in Dave Canales to do that, who is something of a miracle worker with Geno Smith in Seattle, Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. We've also brought in Diontae Johnson, first-round receiver Xavier Legette, second-round running back Jonathon Brooks. The cavalry has arrived, basically. But just first things first, what do you expect this offense to even look like this year? Because I feel like I have no idea what to expect. We know, get the idea, it might be kind of simplistic. Is that wrong? Is that right? What are we even going to see with this Carolina Panthers offense this year?
Well, I think they're hoping the overall trajectory will go a lot like that opening segment where, it was tough to start and then, slowly progress and you saved it and it went, up there. Anyway, we like to have fun in Carolina. I think what they want to do is they want to make sure that Bryce gets out the ball quickly, obviously. They feel like they've improved their protection. They feel like they've improved their weapons. This is not like a do or die season for Bryce internally, and they're trying not to message it that way. But I think there's no other way to look at it if you're a rational person. As Kyle is clearly going through a journey with me there.
You said it, and I was like, it feels like a do or die situation. And you were like, of course it literally is.
Well, I think it is from the sense of if you want to establish this, look, last year you have an older coach who's supposed to be the adult in the room come in and just, I don't know that it could have gone worse, right? In the history of 17-game seasons, they have the worst record. It didn't work. They tried to get this convoluted, round table of different personality types and different outlooks on offense and defense. And it kind of worked out like a House of the Dragon sort of, meeting of the minds. It was not working out. And so I think for them now, they bring in Canales. He's brought a lot of guys. Well, first off, he's retained the defensive staff, but he's also brought in a lot of offensive guys that he's worked with. And if he hasn't worked with them, he's been very well aware of who they are. And so I think having, whenever you fire somebody in the league, you go to the exact opposite, right? And I think their hope is that Canales can kind of be that Kyle Shanahan, Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay type, where he can be, the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and the quarterback's coach. And we've seen that model work. We've also seen it not work. And I think you're betting on a guy who's maybe got hired as a head coach a year too early because you're going to give him a runway. And I think in order for Canales' bet to pay off, he's got to be doing what he did with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. He wants to get the ball out after 2.7 seconds. And as I ramble, ultimately he wants to make sure that he has an answer for a cheat sheet for every answer on the quiz, basically.
Not rambling at all. And basically what I would have expected when you get Diontae Johnson, who's like the ultimate get open over the middle of the field player, Xavier Legette, a guy who kind of seems like a manufactured touch receiver, someone maybe to get involved behind the line of scrimmage, maybe on some handoffs, at least early in his career. They're hoping his route tree can eventually expand. But so those dots were kind of easy to connect. And it sounds like you're saying that that's because they are being connected. And this is all going to be about, not that they wanted him to get the ball out slowly last year, but especially with the way they had bad protection last year, but maybe who knows how much of that was Bryce Young's fault. And it just seems like, yeah, you're confirming that the emphasis is going to be, young man, you have to get the ball out as quickly as possible.
Well, and he'll have the opportunity to. I think when you just brought it up, Diontae Johnson's one of the best route runners in the league. He's able to kind of run every route in the tree. And listen, he has every reason to have a breakout season, considering he's in the final year of his deal. I think the trade they made for him was a very low risk, very high reward trade, and that they traded Diontae Jackson and a low round pick and swapped low round picks. They were going to cut Diontae Jackson the next day. So that kind of works out. I think you look at Xavier Legette as kind of like a two-way player. And when I say that, he's a guy that they're going to throw the ball down the field to on like 9 and post routes. But like you said, they're also going to use him behind the line of scrimmage. I think, routes in between those are going to be like kind of the learning curve. I don't think you're going to see him run a bunch of comebacks. I don't think you're going to see him. Maybe he runs a slant, right? Like early in the route tree. But I think he's a guy that they feel like long-term can be a red zone weapon and a guy who can dictate the way matchups are set up pre-snap. And so that's important. Adam Thielen obviously had a 100-catch, 1,000-yard season. I think these three guys complement each other extremely well. And then you factor in Jonathan Mingo, who,
literally forget about him.
Well, here, the ultimate stat is this. Bryce Young was sacked 62 times for 477 yards lost.
Man.
Jonathan Mingo had less receiving yardage than that, despite starting 14 games. And he scored no touchdowns. So, there's a lot to prove there. I know that the scouting community, there were people in the scouting community that were really high on him. There were other people that thought he was well overdrafted. Yes. So they need to figure out kind of, you're drafting Legette, who does have somewhat comparable measurements, not a comparable player in my opinion, but they're going to want him to get involved. He was handpicked by the GM, handpicked by the head coach. Jonathan Mingo kind of needs to figure out where he is. He's kind of where Terrace Marshall was at last year, where Terrace Marshall's still on the roster somehow, but
I was going to say, I feel like you're remembering some guys, even though they've never been off the roster. You said you're a baseball fan before the show. We like to remember some guys in baseball. I feel like we're doing that with the Panthers too. Like, wow, Terrace Marshall. I haven't heard that name in a decade. And, he's been in the NFL like 3 years. And
yeah.
Says a lot about his career trajectory.
Sure. And look, I think you and I go way back to like old school draft Twitter and talking about all that stuff. And honestly, there's a treasure trove of like deep cuts in this roster, and that's not necessarily a good thing when it comes to depth. Like Troy Hill is competing with Dane Jackson for their number 2 cornerback job. Like it's stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was almost gonna say Laviska Shenault still in the Panthers. He is not. He's still in the NFL. He's on the Seattle Seahawks. But one guy not to be remembered there. You kind of got to the particulars in some of these receivers. I dig in a little more on those. Just with Legette to begin. Very controversial first-round pick. I feel like a lot of people felt he should not be a first-rounder. Can he even get 100 touches? Is that too bearish? By touches, I mean like targets and maybe rushes combined. Like 100 opportunities even? Any chance he even sniffs 100 targets? What do you think the actual overall workload will be for Xavier Legette?
Well, that's why I think Bryce Young's question mark is so big, right? Because we didn't really see him test downfield at all last year, which was something that he did relatively well at Alabama. He didn't really improvise a lot like he did at Alabama. So it's all kind of a mystery. I'd probably put it at 80 targets. I think 80 targets / touches / combined with his,
Yeah, so I'm making it confusing to define.
Yeah, I would say 80 opportunities makes sense. Like I could see him being like a 50 catch, 750-yard-esque rookie. But then again, you look at what happened with Jonathan Mingo. Like, it's just very hard to figure out wide receiver, especially because if I were them, and based on what I saw in OTAs, get Diontae Johnson the ball. Whether, he's going to be the long-term number 1 or whatever. You've got him on a 1-year deal. This team is not ready to contend. I would try to get the most out of Bryce that you possibly can. And if he can open up something, that helps.
You mentioned get Diontae Johnson the ball. I mean, that was the Steelers' plan for years. Every season from 2020 through 2022, he drew at least 140 targets. That included one 16-game season. But then he had the down year in Pittsburgh last year. Seemed like things just kind of went sour between him and the team, too. We know he's like one of the ultimate droppers in the NFL. As you're saying, though, there's not any debate. He's going to be the number one guy in Carolina, at least this season. And the question is just how much can they get him the ball? I mean, do you think an insane number like 140, 150, which would put him amongst the league leaders, makes sense? Or will there not even be that many overall attempts to go around in this offense where no one can get to 140, 150? Do you think it will be Steelers-type usage for Diontae, basically?
They want to spread the ball around, but I think something we learned with Bryce last year is when he really depends on a guy, he is going to target him. And I think it behooves them to get Adam Thielen less involved. So I think, I made the joke when they traded for Diontae Johnson that, great, Adam Thielen's not going to have to run, stop routes every single time he's on the field.
It'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, God bless him. He's working on his versatility too, he says. So, I think they're gonna rotate. They don't believe in the true XY or XFZ sort of wide receiver stuff. They're gonna move guys around. If Legette struggles early, I could see Johnson kind of hitting that top tier. I just don't know. They want to run the ball a lot, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about that. Mm-hmm. That's something that they really believe in. They also have two guys who are very highly motivated to touch the ball in the backfield, and they're older. So I think you're going to see a more balanced attack than you did last year. It's just a matter of what Bryce's proficiency is from a passing standpoint. I think his weapons are as dependable on his growth as any in the league.
I mean, with Thielen, you mentioned Diontae Johnson's whole job is get open, give someone Bryce can rely on. Felt like Thielen was, not to discredit him, but a poor man's version of that. He's older. He probably fits best as a team's 2 or maybe even a team's 3. How far down the total targets do you think he can fall, given that Diontae is just the supreme version of he is your quarterback's best friend, and Thielen was maybe trying to be that last year?
I think ideally you'd want him to be a 60-catch guy as opposed to a 100-catch guy. Ideally, if Legette and Johnson are both working out and they're stretching the field, he's going to eat because that's basically what's going to open up the middle of the field. And I think he averaged basically 10 yards a catch last year. If that's the case, make him a 60-catch player, and hopefully he's averaging 13 yards a catch, right? And you're getting almost comparable production with the less targets. And so I think Canales really wants to spread this ball around. I can't emphasize that enough. And I think when you look at Legette, we know his downside, right? The routes, he's a little bit older. He's got a lot of catching up to do as far as the technique aspect. But I think if they're willing to trust him down the field, he can be a home run hitter for them. And I think that'll impact the output of Johnson and Thielen.
You mentioned a rookie home run hitter and Xavier Legette. He says Legette, doesn't he? I've been trying to get a grip on his. He's got some unique pronunciations there. We're hoping
You'll never
Jonathan.
Believe this, folks. Pat is trying to get a grip on a player's name. He's overthinking it again.
I get a lot of grief for my pronunciation as well, so no worries.
Yeah, I think he wants Xavier Legette. I can't quite get to Lee. I'm still saying Legette. So we're not counting on a lot from Xavier Legette in fantasy this year. I mean, his ADP is wide receiver 66, I believe. We are counting a lot on Jonathon Brooks in summer best ball drafts. He's crept all the way up to RB 23, a really, really explosive player. He was the first running back off the board. Maybe you can quibble how valuable that is in one of the worst running back draft classes ever, but top 50 pick, first runner off the board. He's recovering from a torn ACL, Mike, and we're assuming when you're making someone a top 20 for running back, especially on a bad team like the Panthers, you're assuming they're healthy from week 1. Where is his health at? Is there any chance he's going to be an every down player? He's kind of being drafted like that. And just where's the health with Jonathon Brooks? And what do you think the plan is with Jonathon Brooks?
So he's kind of a weird situation because they didn't seem 100% sure he would start training camp off pop. There's still that lingering hope. I mean, we'll know by Friday, tomorrow, which would be an interesting sign. They're still going to ease him in, but let me paint you guys a picture. There's a guy in Chuba Hubbard who is coming off a career year, who's on the final year of his deal. He wants to be featured as much as possible. If you're a smart GM and you're planning ahead when you know you're not going to contend, maybe you want to run a running back into the ground, especially when you want to run the ball. Then there's Miles Sanders, who's going to be paid $4 million, whether he's on the roster or not. He's also a plus receiver at the position typically. You want to have a rotation. Tampa had a rotation last year. Seattle typically had a rotation as well. Oh, and you've got this gadget weapon in Raheem Blackshear that the front office really likes. Cool. You drafted a guy in the second round. He is the future of your team. You also bring in Brant Tillis, who is a very, very smart cap guy and planner, right, from the Chiefs. To me, it strikes me like this is going to be a true rotation. When you talk about 3 down players, do I think Jonathon Brooks will be the vocal point of that by midseason? Probably. I just don't know if he is the guy right out the gate, especially coming off the ACL injury. I don't think anyone can truly say that without seeing him in pads and seeing him run. I mean, he's been a spectator throughout the offseason since getting there. But you are right. He's a home run hitter. He's a guy that is totally more dynamic than those other 2 guys. And I covered Miles Sanders in Philadelphia. Even then, I think Brooks has the explosion that Miles lacks. He also has the vision if you watch the tape. Like, he knows how to set up his blockers. He knows how to get around blockers. He knows to go out how to go vertically and horizontally up the field. So I think eventually they want him to be the bell cow. I don't know if it's week 1.
What you're basically saying is our ADP is too aspirational, and he maybe should not be an RB2 in fantasy. Or do you think should we just bet on the upside? There's a guy that they really trusted as a wide receiver in college, and like maybe even if he's not like an every down guy, he can get enough high value touches. It was only 1 year at Texas too, but like if you were drafting today, would you make Jonathon Brooks a top 24 running back, Mike?
I was trying to think of like a comp for him, and like I was like, I really can't think of one. Like when I think about the ACL, I think about Todd Gurley a lot because he was able to recover and have that. I mean, he's not Todd Gurley.
Go on.
Yeah. So like, I like the idea of him long term. And then I was thinking Devonta Freeman, like kind of from a role early on sort of thing. It's hard to think about because he's a guy who, he only tore his ACL. Like it was just the ACL, and they feel very comfortable about him being that guy. They traded up to 46 like that. They've put a lot of eggs in that basket. I think like he's one of those guys that if in the second half of the season they're not playing particularly well, you could see him get a ton of touches, even though he is coming out of the backfield because you want to rev him up. But yeah, no, I mean, to me, he'd be like if I was in the 2-back flex league, I mean, he'd be my flex probably. He'd be my 3rd running back probably.
Do you think maybe the usage comp could be like Breece Hall last year? Because they were platooning him early in the season with Dalvin Cook, who they went on to cut before the end of the season. Like, kind of tells you what they thought about him, but also tells you how desperate they were to ease Breece in the first like month to month and a half.
I think that's a fair comparison. I mean, I think, ACLs are so tricky because they've kind of like Achilles has kind of taken over as like the more kind of like, hey, this is going to mess up a running back. This is going to mess up whoever. Most of us grew up with Willis McGahee having like the worst knee injury we could possibly imagine. And then he plays a decade plus in the NFL. So I think it's a matter, like everybody's different. And I hate to be like so speculative.
I mean, yeah, it's the position you're in. We're like, yeah. Mike, give us certainty. And you're going, well, what if I can't do that?
Yeah, give us medical certainty too. Give us certainty on the specifics of a guy's knee. We're putting you on the spot.
Here's what I will say. Austin Corbett was the best offensive player on the Panthers in 2022. He was overshadowed by the production of the ground game solely being based and publicized by Bradley Bozeman at center and Diontae Foreman just running wild. Austin Corbett was phenomenal. He is now moving to center. That gives them a lot more athleticism up front. He can get out in space a lot better. They bring in Damian Lewis, who they know really well from Seattle. He's going to play left guard. Robert Hunt is going to play right guard. He's a road grader. He also scores oddly weird looking leaping touchdowns that don't count. Those three can really dictate the running game. And look, Ike Ekwonu, for all the flack he gets as a pass blocker, he's a phenomenal run blocker. And so I think you're going to see them play to that strength in a way that they did not last year. And I think that benefits Brooks. So if there was a guy who could break out following an ACL injury, it does feel like he could be that guy if you're looking for upside.
Mike, is Miles Sanders the clear-cut number 2, or is it going to be Chuba, who seems like they can't kill in this backfield, kind of like they always make non-Chuba plans, and then Chuba just kind of re-involves himself. Rashad Penny is also on the roster, recreating old Eagles backfields. Is Miles Sanders the salary, you mentioned is uncuttable? Is he the number 2, or is that job open for competition?
I think Chuba and Miles are competing to be at the top of the totem pole to start the summer. Like, I think that's legitimate. Like, I don't think that that's just talk, especially when you have a guy coming off an ACL injury and you don't want to rush him, and there's no need to, right? Like, because you're paying both those guys anyway, and Chuba Hubbard has every reason to stand out, similarly to Diontae Johnson. Chuba Hubbard's what I like to call a possession running back, in that he can pick up 4 yards and he rarely loses yardage. Like, he'll pick up 3 to 4 yards. He's probably not going to get you a lot of minus runs. Miles Sanders, on the other hand, is like an all or nothing sort of play, right? So they
usually nothing.
Right. They complement each other relatively well, vision's always been an issue for him. And I'm just curious, there's a new running backs coach. Deuce Staley wanted him in Carolina. That didn't work out. I mean, look, he has every reason to want to bounce back, prove that he's still capable of being a starting running back in the league. And I think they'll give him every chance because they're paying him anyway.
We'll get you out of here on kind of a boilerplate one. And maybe you don't have an answer for this, but I've been asking everybody this. Who is a Panthers skill player that surprised you this spring? And we know they're not in pads. We know they're not hitting. Especially now, a team with a new coach, all these new parts, they're kind of just getting to know each other and getting to know the offense. But who's just someone who surprised you in Panthers OTAs this spring?
Well, I hate to be a wet blanket here, but I had arm surgery during OTAs, so I was only there for a few of those. Look, I think Tommy Tremble's a guy that has always had upside. He's more of a blocker than a pass catcher, but I think he's a guy they'd like to win the job. I think, Jatavian Sanders is a guy that, to me, if you remember Jordan Matthews back in the day where he was a big slot, like, he strikes me as a guy who could be more of an heir apparent to Adam Thielen than to the actual true, like, wide tight end position. Tremble can block, and they want to run the ball, and he can catch, and he's probably their only, like, proven, air quoting here for the podcast, red zone threat. I mean, Ian Thomas actually looked great, but I think Carolina Panthers fans are over everybody being like, oh, in summer when there's no pads, Ian Thomas can catch.
This time he can.
I mean, look, I think when you look at guys like Raheem Blackshear, like, they're not probably fantasy options, but I am really interested to see how he takes on the kick returner role, because that dude is dynamic and he really fits what the new rule kind of encompasses. I mean, look, everybody's big on Jalen Coker. He watched most of practices. Like, I hate to squash other people's dreams. But, like, the reality is nobody really stood out outside of Diontae Johnson.
Interesting. So you're telling me the undrafted rookie out of Holy Cross didn't really stand out during OTAs. That's a real shame.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a big following there. I covered Keelan Cole as a rookie and got flack for covering a guy coming out of a college no one had ever heard of. Kentucky Wesleyan, I think, is the college. And maybe he can follow suit.
Well, Mike, awesome stuff. Always awesome stuff in the Panthers beat. Tell people where they can find you, including on Twitter or X. We can't decide what we're calling it on this show.
Yeah,
what you might have coming up.
Well, I'll make it a combo thing. So I tweet on X at Mike _E_ Kaye. It's the worst handle on Twitter, but I got it before I was a writer, and I stick with things. I stick to the bit. You can also follow all my work in the sports section of the CharlotteObserver.com.
Awesome stuff. Got to follow Mike. Got to read his stuff on the Panthers beat like we do. We can learn what they're actually going to do with Xavier Legette this summer if Diontae Johnson is happy and on path for 140 targets. And if Jonathon Brooks is healthy, you're going to be 3 down back. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. Join us. Enjoy your final little vacation for training camp, and we'll be reading you this summer.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Mike, and thank you to Ian Hartitz. We'll be here right after this short break. The Rotoworld Draft Guide is back, and it has a bit of a facelift. Now available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Draft Guide to help you dominate your competition. Use promo code ROTOWORLD10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. Kyle, I botched a promo read there too. I'm having trouble reading the English language today. I'm not having trouble welcoming in Mr. Ian Hartitz, who is formerly a cast member of this show. Were you ever here when it was called A Good Football Show, or did you predate even those days? I can't remember, Ian.
I think I was just before that, man. I came in the same time as Dagsy and Hayden Winks, man. What a time to be alive, but good to be back and good to be sharing the screen with you two fine gentlemen.
Really, really good to be back. Not good that you've changed your, or I guess our producer Adam changed your handle here from free Drew Lock to now just Ian Hartitz at iHartitz. And yeah, Drew Lock, as a Mizzou alum, I think he needs to be freed. I don't know how many NFL quarterbacks he's better than. I know he's better than Daniel Jones, though.
Pat,
Mike,
you know it, man.
10 touchdowns to Albert O in Albert O's true freshman season, if I remember correctly. So even me, as you know, I have no affiliation with Locke. I'm in. I like the guy.
Look, you don't have to like the guy, but we can all admit he's a fun, bad quarterback. And Lord knows we've seen enough games with just bad, annoying. Look, Drew Lock's going to go down with the ship, okay? We're never going to be like, I wish Drew Lock would have tried to do more. The very opposite of that, in fact. And over the course of, an 18-week season for now, yeah, I think a little bit more like, the Drew Lock, Jameis Winston guys of the world, make it a little more fun.
Yeah, Drew Lock, he takes responsibility for this boat. And sure, it may be his fault that it's sinking, but he's taking responsibility for that. By the way, Ian, I'd be remiss before we dig into the previewing the NFC South. We can't do that without asking you about NCAA 25. I've seen you tweet at least a few times about it. I know that you own it. Just tell me what your early experience is with it, maybe who you're doing a dynasty with, and just how much of your life has been taken over by NCAA 25.
Haven't kicked off the dynasty just yet. Just been running through some play now modes, getting my practice reps in. Lord knows I'm staying away from online play. I mean, I saw some people trying to say like, "Oh, I'm going to beat up on these 12-year-olds." No, it's a brand new world out there, guys. And I'm not trying to get my ass kicked by these teenagers like as my way of having fun, man. I want to go beat up on some computers and just kind of live my life. So had to, fire up my Buckeyes there a little bit at first. And I will say, having the best team in the league helps make up for some of the changes. But no, man, presentation's awesome, and I'm just happy I never have to pretend to care about Madden again.
Say, hey, from your words, not mine. Right? And yeah, but if I ever played online, I would not score a single point. Yeah, I would maybe like accidentally get a safety at some point. I would never score a single touchdown. I'd throw 15 interceptions. I forgot this is an all Buckeyes podcast now. Kyle tries to hide his Buckeyes fandom. Ian does not. Ian is a proud Buckeyes fan. He's got the truck with the flag flying in the back. Oh, stop.
I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. So, hey, man, it's been a rough couple years for us, but feeling good about 2024.
Yeah,
it's so Buckeye coded to be like, oh, it's been a rough couple years for us. We win 12 games every year. Like, Pat had the greatest year of his life last year. And for us, it was like, I literally didn't watch the Mizzou game. So I'm like, who gives that? Like, I don't care. This game doesn't matter. All of our good players are sitting. It's Mizzou. I didn't care if we win or lost. And that's so privileged for you to say.
Hey, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It's catastrophic for Ohio State to lose to Mizzou. You can never be losing.
No, it's catastrophic for us to get to a point where we play Mizzou. That's
true.
The
That's
loss,
really, really good.
It's embarrassing, but at that point, we were already over it.
Well, speaking of catastrophic, there was Bijan Robinson's 2023. Not to be dramatic, guys, but Bijan, he was the prince who was promised. And then Arthur Smith had other prophecies in mind, including Tyler Algier for some unknown reason. But Art Smith is gone. This new Rams-style brain trust is in Atlanta. Ian, fantasy managers are all in. It's like 2023 didn't happen. We're making Bijan Robinson currently the RB2 off the board in summer best ball drafts. He couldn't end up the RB3 or 4 in more normal redraft leagues. But I'll just ask you, are you comfortable with kind of memory holing the 2023 Bijan Robinson experience, blaming it all on Arthur Smith? Or are you skeptical, worried? Where are you on the Bijan Robinson sophomore season?
I'm buying him as the RB2. I'd only take CMC ahead of him. It is comical to me that we act like this dude was almost like an RB3 in fantasy. He was the RB17. Okay. He had 300 combined carries and targets. I agree. We had a little more Algier than any of us would have preferred. And that one time that Jonnu got the goal line, carry inside the 5 was pretty messed up. So all that said, as bad as everything that Arthur Smith brought to the table was, I'm not going to sit here and defend the guy. I'd argue the bigger issue was freaking Desmond Ridder under center and then Taylor Heineke. I mean, it has been a catastrophic quarterback situation in Atlanta for years. So accordingly, when the Falcons only had 8 team RB carries inside the 5-yard line, to me, that was the primary problem. So now bringing in Kirk Cousins, hopefully Zach Robinson, gives the featured role and everything. I just expect this offensive environment as a whole to be quite a bit better. So Bijan, obviously special 3-down talent, everything that, Morris and Robinson are saying about the role indicates he should be seeing, well over 300, opportunities this time around. But yeah, man, I'm buying. Now, would I take him over kind of the big 5 wide receivers? Probably not, but if you got, pick 7, pick 8 in your drafts, you could do a heck of a lot worse than Mr. Bijan Robinson.
Did you just say 8 total team carries inside the 5-yard line for the 5? That's a real stat.
That was running backs. Let me double check. It's not far off if I'm wrong on it, but I was
going to say that's 100%. That's the amount of running back carries they had. I mean, sure, Desmond Ridder threw in 3 or 4 more, but it tells you what you need to know, right? Like if the number's off by 2 because we didn't count our Desmond Ridder goal line sneaks, I don't care. It was, I think, to your point, Ian.
It is
offense, there were a lot.
Unreal.
Nice. There were a lot of issues. Algier was one of them, but frankly, the offense being really bad and getting in positions to let players win so little was, to me, the biggest issue. It wasn't the only issue, and it was probably no more obvious an issue for someone like Kyle Pitts, who just the X share, the target share, the route share, all that stuff was actually between fine and good. He saw a ton of air yards and a ton of targets. That means very little when your team throws not much at all. And it means even worse when every air yard and every target is generated at the hands of Desmond Ridder. Those are useless. They're complete vaporware stats that don't matter. Maybe the fact that he earned them all says something, but for my bank account personally, it did not do any, well, it did damage, but not in a good way. Is now it has people like Pat, I'm holding the faith, has people like Pat questioning, is he even good? Can we get a consensus? But say it my way, please. I need you to say it.
Well, look, with Pitts, there's 3 main factors that tore apart last year. The bad quarterback play that you mentioned. All right, we got Kirk Cousins in there. I think we should be maybe a little more worried about the Achilles than everyone seems to be. But at a minimum, give me 80% of Kirk Cousins. I think we can agree that's still an upgrade over what we've been dealing with. Number 2, Jonnu Smith was having just as many targets. And honestly, based on what Jonnu did after the catch, I don't know. I didn't think it was the worst idea ever to get him the football. I mean, the dude's pretty good after the catch. Regardless, he's in Miami now. So primary competition also out of the picture. And then factor number 3 is the fact that Kyle Pitts was a lot more banged up than we thought. I mean, we thought this dude was just coming back from the MCL injury. We find out, freaking December or January. Oh, by the way, there were more ligaments involved in that. Would have been cool to know that 6 months before me and Kyle drafted way too freaking much of him, but better late than never. And again, so if any of those 3 factors hadn't turned around, I'd be less, willing to kind of go in on Pitts. But now the way things stand, just from a pure rank the tight ends just only in terms of how many targets we expect them to see, you're not going to be able to put more than 5 or 6 guys in front of Pitts. So I'm not sitting here saying, you need to draft him in round 4, round 5 as his top 3 option, but the dude's still only 24. Everything that went against him last year is now coming his way. And I think, when you do look at the positions big 7, I have a hard time being too far down on him. So I'm going Team Kyle. Sorry, Pat.
Well, this 2 thoughts here real quick. What if the Jonnu Smith thing last year was more about Kyle Pitts than Jonnu? And just what if that, I'm hoping it didn't speak to Kyle Pitts. It could have spoken to his health, like you pointed out, Ian, where he was a lot more banged up than we thought. Are you guys not concerned when, it's the middle of July and just 4 days ago, the Falcons offensive coordinator said, quote, Pitts has a lot on his plate. learning two different positions in the new Atlanta offense. And to me, when I kind of hear that, it's year 4 and NFL coaches still aren't entirely sure what position Kyle Pitts plays. And that just kind of still concerns me.
I'm not as concerned because like all of the elite, not all, some of the elite tight ends truly just play like, get me open, get me the ball. Like what % of Mark Andrews routes do you think come from in line?
Very few. Most of these guys are already glorified big slots. Kyle Pitts has already been playing most of his reps in the slot or out wide. Honestly, that quote to me sounds like just typical July coach speak where we're kind of putting too much into it. I'm not worried about that. Like, okay, yeah, can you argue that Pitts would be getting easier matchups potentially against linebackers and safeties from in line? Okay, but honestly, he's a tight end who has a 1,000-yard season under his belt, even if it happened, freaking 3 years ago.
Jimmy Carter was president.
I know. I was waiting for something like that. There's some damning stats out there. There really are. Jimmy Graham has more touchdowns than Kyle Pitts over the past 3 years. That's a real thing that exists in the world.
What?
So again, has not been great. I get it. But, at the end of the day, I believe Travis Kelce didn't even have a career catch yet when he was Kyle Pitts' age. So I still believe, come on, Kyle, one time.
By the way, I misspoke. Jimmy Carter wasn't president. He was still governor of Georgia. So, Kyle Pitts. I agree with the Kyle Pitts optimism. And I just think it's always a red flag when a guy has alibis. Like, because people who are really good rise above the alibis.
Fair.
But the Pitts alibis last year, 3 alibis that anyone else would kill to have: Arthur Smith, Desmond Ridder, and the knee. Like, they're not just made up. They were real excuses. You say still only 24 years old. Still did have the 1,000-yard season as a rookie. Finally, as a real quarterback. At the end of the day, I'm still on team Kyle Pitts optimism. It just kind of feels like a madhouse sometimes. We're like, here's why it actually counts.
Fair.
Right? Kyle Pitts, though, he's not the number 1 pass catcher in his offense because it's Drake London. And Drake has shown a lot more than Kyle Pitts. Drake did a better job. He did what I want to see from a player like an offensive star in a bad situation where he did kind of rise above it. It's hard to consistently do that, but basically back-to-back 900-yard seasons. He didn't quite get there as a rookie, Ian, but never has reached 120 targets despite mostly staying healthy. Missed 1 game last year. But so he was a target commander in really, really bad offensive setups. Looked like a guy who was living up to his first-round pedigree. Now that he's in an actual legitimate offensive setup, is it crazy to expect him to get in the league leaders and targets like the 140, 150 range, Ian?
He's one of 11 wide receivers that Fantasy Life, a.k.a. Dwayne McFarland, our director of analytics, projects to have over 135. So sounds like that's a real possibility, man. They did bring in Darnell Mooney, surprisingly like $39 million deal. I didn't see that one coming. I will say the one thing that makes me nervous about a team like the Falcons is when they're trying to solve so many of their problems with these big free agent additions, because we just historically see if you are a truly great football player, guess what? Your team's not letting you hit the open market and walk away.
Especially as a skill player.
Oh, 100%. So that's why, like, the Falcons as a whole, like their win total, their chance to win the division, I'm pretty down on. But I think similar to the New York Jets, this offense is going to be condensed enough with the volume around these, kind of big playmakers that it should be fine in Fantasyland. So with London, just the wide receiver 48 in PPR points per game these first 2 seasons combined, primarily because of the lack of touchdowns, but similar to someone that we're also expecting to make the jump in Garrett Wilson, we do again have the quarterback upgrade and just the likelihood that we're going to see a ton of targets out here. So Cousins, even if he hasn't been this, top 5 elite quarterback year in, year out, his wide receiver 1 usually has been, man. From Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, to Justin Jefferson, 3 very good to great wide receivers in their own rights, obviously. But it's been like clockwork that Cousins has produced at least 1, if not 2 wide receiver 1s over the years. So for London, someone where it's wild, guys. I know we're still, spending a lot of time in the best ball streets for London is regularly going at that round 1 term, but man, you start
10 overall.
But you start looking at some of these ESPN Yahoo ADPs, and it's early, but that's what the folks are playing on, and he's going like pick 35 over on ESPN. So there's a couple guys out there where, again, it's just egregiously, in my opinion, wrong ADP, and Drake London really stands out right now for anyone out there in those ESPN leagues.
Kyle, real quick, how many Drake London shares do you have this summer, like percentage wise, you would say?
17. I looked recently.
Wow. All right. That's pretty. Yeah. All right. So you're not out on Drake London. You seem more than out on Drake London. Yeah.
No. I'm in on this team. I'm fully buying them as passing the football a lot and doing it to like two guys. I mean, it's the two guys we've talked about so far that we see everywhere Kirk Cousins goes. His guys want to throw. His offensive coordinator and his head coach have all talked about like, they've like very strongly hinted we're leaving this form of the offense you've seen for the past 3 years behind. We're getting a modern NFL offense for these guys. And all of the condensing the offense stats, which in some sense are talent stats. Like guys who get a lot of targets are talented, even if it's a lot of targets relative to the rest of their offense, which is what you have to do for guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Both of those guys have done it. So I'm in them. You know, it's a little scary. We haven't seen it yet. But if there's anyone that's going to make the leap, to me, it's clearly these two. And I think the argument for Drake London making the leap is like equally as good as Garrett Wilson. He goes a few picks later. So like, I take both of them, but I actually take a decent amount, obviously, like almost twice as much as 1 out of 12 of Drake London. I talked about the condensed offense, and we hinted at the guy who made a lot of money, that being Darnell Mooney. Do you think there's a trickle down? This offense is good, and we want to buy ancillary pieces of it, with Darnell Mooney being the most likely? Because we say Kyle Pitts hasn't been good in a long time. That argument more so than anyone holds true for Darnell Mooney, given how much money he made and how long it's been since he's been fantasy irrelevant. So, Ian, like any interest in even just best ball stacks, throwing a Darnell Mooney on there?
Isn't that like the ultimate? I'm not into this guy. Is like, well, in best ball, if I have a stack going, maybe if he falls past ADP as well.
If he falls past ADP is a good one. Like, if he's not priced the way everyone prices him, sure, I'll take him.
Yeah, I don't hate any players, just at cost, if they're okay, you can say so. No, I'm not in on Darnell Mooney. So it's just one of these things where, what are we chasing? The time he finished as a wide receiver 29 a couple years ago, like people still throw out that one time Jalen Ramsey was like in zero coverage and he bites on a double move and Darno doesn't even make the catch. Like we're still leaning on that one highlight from 4 years ago to try to hype up Mooney. So I thought last year, in an offense where, hey, DJ Moore didn't have a problem going for 1,300 yards with Justin Fields and T-Bag under center. So it's one of these situations where why couldn't Mooney do more? Was he just more injured than we thought? I can't make the same sort of excuses with the problems being rectified like I feel like I can with Drake London and Kyle Pitts and these guys. So for Mooney, ESPN's open score, which I do think does a pretty good job of quantifying separation relative to some of the other measures we have out there. Just 89th last season. And, I took the time this offseason to go back and watch his targets and see if the idea that Justin Fields was just missing them wide open time and time again. And there were some bad ones in that Washington Thursday night game because what wide receiver doesn't get wide open against the Commanders secondary? But otherwise, guys, like really did not see much out of Mooney. And I think that's been the case for the better part of the last few seasons. So this to me feels like an overpay, okay, he's gone outside the top 60 wide receivers, so I'm not trying to talk too much crap about anyone going that low in drafts in the first place. But guys like Mooney, guys like Gabe Davis, just because you're a wide receiver getting 30 million plus, hey, maybe it does signal something, but I think more times than not, we're looking at the MVS types of the world.
The only thing I'll say that we're chasing with Darnell Mooney is just that this Falcons offense is not as deep as advertised. And people who listen to the show every week have heard me harp on this point, but it was like a real common offseason storyline. Just get Kirk Cousins, the Falcons, all these weapons. And then he got there. It's like, okay, actually it's 2 weapons. Maybe.
Oh, hey, what about Rondale in the Cooper Kupp role, right? He's playing the slot, the Cooper Kupp role. We can say that about all of them, right?
Good thing someone mentioned Rondale, because I think that's the case for like Rondale or Mooney is like forgotten men. It's just that this offense is not as deep as it appears. It could be 3 deep in terms of weapons, which would give them a leg up on a lot of other teams. But there's no 4th weapon at all right now. Like that role is really up for grabs, and that's the only argument there really is for Mooney.
Shots fired at Kadarius Hodge, but okay.
So that's a good time to take a break. We'll let Kadarius recover. We'll be right back after this. For the 10th time in history, Royal Troon hosts the world's best golfers who are competing for the title Championship Golfer of the Year. It's the only major where victory is best served out of a jug. The 152nd Open, Thursday through Sunday on NBC, USA Network, and streaming on Peacock. Okay, listen, Ian. No one actually wants to talk about this next thing. We're on the New Orleans Saints. The next thing, of course, is Derek Carr. And just, do we care at all about this new Saints offense? And, this shanified by way of Kubiak offense, Klint Kubiak, the new OC. They finally moved on. from Pete Carmichael after seriously 15 years as the offensive coordinator. We'll get to Rashid Shaheed in a little bit. We know that I found an Ian Rashid Shaheed fact in your Twitter bio. But yeah, how much do we care about this new offense? Or at the end of the day, is it still just Derek Carr? And there's only so much excitement you can gin up for a Derek Carr-led offense.
Sometimes it's tough to know with, these things like motion and play action that we obviously see kind of associated with some of the league's better offenses. But I know late career Big Ben, some of these veteran quarterbacks just don't like turning their backs to the defense. So accordingly, they run less. But the pre-snap shift and motion stuff, I do think is a decent sign of what coaches are kind of forward thinking these days. Because you look at the top offenses from last year, Miami, San Francisco, the Rams, the Lions, those are the only 4 teams doing it at over 70% clip. And then the 3 teams doing it under 40% were the Saints, the Cardinals, and the Eagles. So in terms of the Saints and the Eagles, there's not much room to go but up in terms of the little things they could do to help fix the offense. But with Carr, man, is he that much worse than the Kirk Cousins, yes. Matthew Stafford tier? Yes. He is. Okay, yes. Fair. So I guess we're done here.
I'm with you, Ian.
Go ahead, Kyle.
It's hardly even a Carr support. It's like, dude, it's freaking Kirk Cousins. Anyone can beat Kirk Cousins in the right circumstances. When you've got Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison, you can look kind of good. But does Derek Carr have those guys? He's got one guy that I really like, Chris Olave. One guy that a lot of other people like. That's pretty good. He's got a Buckeye. Go Bucs. And who else is a Buckeye on this team? They actually don't have a lot of Buckeyes, even though they draft Buckeyes all the time. They have Marshawn Lattimore.
They got Lattimore.
Yeah.
So Carr is that good when he's working from a clean pocket, but he just falls apart at the first sign of pressure and
turns to sand immediately.
Exactly, very, very quickly. So only Purdy, Goff, Stroud, and Tua actually had better passer ratings than Carr from the luxury of a clean pocket. So again, if the NFL ever goes full 7-on-7, you just can't make contact anymore. I'm sure he can do a few things, but I will say the one thing that shocked me was he tied Stroud for the most 300-yard passing games last season. So sadly, we get 0 on the ground. So no, I'm not interested in drafting Carr, but hey, we saw it to an extent with Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. We saw it with Devontae Adams, his last year with the Raiders. He can enable at least one fantasy relevant wide receiver. So even if I'm not in on Carr, I don't think that Olave and our true number 1 wide receiver, Rashid Shaheed, are necessarily, looking at a situation where they can't get going. I feel like having Carr is at a minimum, man. I feel much better about the receivers than, say, the guys, working out of the Raiders offense right now.
Makes a lot of sense. And those receivers on the Saints, we think Chris Olave is a really good young player, potentially even a superstar, but his career is kind of off to like an Amari Cooper type start where he's established that floor. 1,000 yards both seasons. He's catching some touchdowns. He's making explosive plays, but it seemed like he had a lot of trouble getting on the same page with Derek Carr last year. And it seemed like someone got in Derek Carr's ear about that. And this, near the end of the season, it seemed like they were connecting a lot more. But Andis, where are we at on Chris Olave? And is he a star? Is he just kind of stuck in the Cooper zone? He's on the wide receiver 1-2 borderline. Do you think that's fair, or do you think we see further ascendance from Chris Olave?
I don't know that he's ever going to be this top 5 talent in the league, but I certainly think he belongs, almost where he's being drafted recently with the Devonta Smiths and Jalen Waddles. If Olave was your overqualified number 2 wide receiver, I think you'd be thrilled about it as an NFL team. It's kind of when you force him to be that number 1 alpha that, I don't think he quite stacks up to the A.J. Browns of the world and stuff like that. But still, ESPN's 9th best wide receiver in that open score metric, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Certainly not bad considering, again, even though I said some nice things about Carr. Also, not exactly, playing with Josh Allen under center or anything like that. But you said it about the missed opportunities, man. Every year in my, every week, I should say, in my Sheesh report, I will be tracking unrealized air yards, just a fancy way of trying to measure, again, how many yards we're losing on incomplete passes. And last season, only DeAndre Hopkins had more than Chris Olave. So, some of those are prayer yards. Didn't exactly have a chance for them. But, man, one of only 8 wide receivers to get at least 40% of their offense's air yards and 25% of the targets. I'm with Kyle where, when we are trying to distinguish what wide receivers are really talented, probably the ones getting them thrown the football the most.
So you go, Kyle. Do you have a final thought there, Chris Olave? Or
No, I thought the Amari Cooper sort of, he could be that guy is totally reasonable. Amari Cooper has a really strong career for a decade, but just doesn't hit that 1,500-1,500 yard season, doesn't hit that dozen touchdown season. And ultimately, like, he was a great pick as like a GM evaluating talent goes, but like not every great pick hits a true Julio Jones level ceiling. So I think it's fine to like place that as a sort of career wide comp for him. I was actually going to spin it too. You talk about guys who get a lot of targets. Alvin Kamara, a part of the reason this offense looks so underwhelming is that when they throw the ball downfield, it's these contested catch downfield to Chris Olave kind of throws. When they throw it short, it's not let's get Chris Olave open in space across the middle. It's check down to Alvin Kamara, check down to Alvin Kamara. I believe he was like first or second in the NFL in targets, and that was with missing 3 game targets among running backs. That was while missing 3 games. But his efficiency numbers year over year over year continue to trickle down. He still looks good as a pass catcher. All the efficiency metrics as a runner are just flashing red. How much longer can he sustain being a high volume and low efficiency, to put it frankly, kind of guy?
Man, as long as his offense continues to surround him with the one running back with worse efficiency, which was Jamal Williams last year, maybe Kendre Miller can stay healthy and give us something, but I don't think we saw anything. The only thing working in Kendre Miller's favor is the fact that, again, Kamara and Williams look so bad on the ground that how could this guy, possibly be any worse? But, dude, just in terms of the targets, I mean, they added nobody to this offense. The entire offseason, a running back, wide receiver, tight end that can really threaten the targets going to Kamara. So the fact that he was somehow, guys, in PPR points per game, the RB3 last season is still just completely shocking to me. But that's what happens in this freaking society when we reward an entire point just for the simple act of catching a football.
On.
So
don't tell me you've been gone against PPR.
Well, it shouldn't be the same. How is a freaking screen to Alvin Kamara the same as, Olave making a diving catch 40 yards downfield? If you take the fantasy point leaderboards and compare them to who we consider the best, quote unquote, real life talents, I think they usually match up pretty well. But the two differences we get are these receiving heavy running backs and the rushing quarterbacks, because that's another, story. But hey, man, the volume's there. And yeah, the inefficiency was horrible, but it was also horrible for Josh Jacobs, for Saquon Barkley, for a lot of these guys, for Rachaad White as well. They were all just as bad as Kamara last year, and we don't really care because they get fed the football. So with Kamara, not someone I've been going after, at reckless abandon or anything like that, but man, you start seeing him being priced round 5, round 6. Yeah, I would not want to draft him right now as the usual round 1 through round 3 guy we've done over the years, but certainly seems like he's, having this inefficiency held against them more so than the other running backs. Joe Mixon's another one of those guys. Piece of the puzzle, but we got to consider for everyone, not just, these select few.
Yeah, he's an eat your vegetables RB2 still, I think. And even though it is the new system, I'm not expecting the wheel to be reinvented. It's such a veteran-laden offense. Yeah. Like, it's their second year together. Even with the new OC, I'm not expecting, like, the basically the roots of the Pete Carmichael system just be ripped up. And, like, it's like a totally different approach. So I do feel comfortable with Alvin Kamara. Do we care at all about Kendre Miller, by the way? Like, because we know Kamara, the efficiency has gone down, but it's probably because he's being used how he should not be used. He should not be the early down banger. Kendre Miller, though, total 0 as a rookie for a variety of reasons. They didn't add meaningful competition, though. Do we have any excitement like for Kendre Miller as like a contingency late round flyer back?
Again, I'm trying not to hate too hard on anyone that usually goes outside like the top 150 picks. I saw someone on Twitter today just like freaking out about Chuba Hubbard. It's like, really? These are the guys that we need to waste our time on, apparently. So it's fine. I will say in that similar price range, though, I've usually been going after Tyler Algier and even Antonio Gibson, Patriots RB2, because as much as I do think Kendre has a path to some, touches because of how bad Jamal and Kamara were last season, when Kamara was suspended, and then even later in the year, I mean, Jamal still was the number 2 RB. They had step up. They paid him money last offseason for that very reason. So even if Kamara gets hurt, man, I think Jamal probably still starts, gets his 15-plus inefficient carries. Kendre probably gets some more work in the passing game, but I don't think it's one of these, handcuff. Like, all right, Bijan goes down, I think Algier probably gets an every down role, and he could arguably be a volume-based RB1 league winner. Exactly. I don't quite see that for Kendre. He might be 2 injuries away from that. So when those two are close, I'm usually going with guys like Algier and Gibson.
You make it. Jamal Williams is an uncuttable contract. He's guaranteed $4 million this year. So I think you're on to something there with Jamal Williams. To close the book on the Saints, so you think Chris Olave is good, and yet you have in your literal Twitter bio, not just like a tweet, in your bio, you have Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver 1. I do love explosive play threats, big play guys. I'm assuming you don't actually believe he's a wide receiver 1. Maybe you do. But just kidding aside, what's the reason for the Rashid Shaheed excitement? I guess one reason is because every time he touches the ball, it's exciting.
Every time they look his way, it's exciting, man. Number one, Pat. Number one in yards per target over these past 2 seasons with everyone with over 100 targets. This isn't even one of those, I remember Hartitz with the Saints had some just crazy efficiency measures, but it was like 51 targets. And, we got to give some sort of credit to the guys that make that efficiency happen on the much larger sample. Obviously, big difference between shooting 50% from 3, 8 attempts per game versus 4. But that said, man, just again, from his first season in the league, even to last year, punt returner, he gets some reverses and then just working downfield. Like we saw it with Matt Harmon's reception perception, man. The things that the Saints ask Rashid Shaheed to do, which is usually stretch the field, he does very well. And again, so we have someone who smaller sample, but has been very efficient in the smaller sample. And then who's his competition? A.T. Perry, like Lynn Bowden, Keith Kirkwood. They didn't. Bub Means is probably the biggest competition. The dude's already, bagged up somehow before football has even started. So we'll see what happens there. But look, when Michael Thomas went down at the end of last season over the course of those final month or so of games, Olave had an 86% route rate and Shaheed was at 79%. So he's going to be out there as the clear-cut number 2 wide receiver in this offense. And no, I don't think that necessarily he's going to be putting up wide receiver 1 numbers, contrary to what my Twitter bio is saying. But hey, man, right now being priced outside the top 50 wide receivers, I think he's more than capable of being, a boom or bust wide receiver 4 guy. And even if I'm usually taking Curtis Samuel over him in that exact range of the draft, man, Rashid Shaheed, certified baller, and I love watching him play. Also a big-time returner for the Saints as well, reigning first-team All-Pro. So Scott Fishbowl fanatics already know how much that can come in handy in certain leagues.
Yeah, too
He's
late
the
for that
SFB
info now.
MVP.
He was been taken 4 days ago in Scott Fishbowl.
Oh, yeah.
John Daigle took him like round 5.
Yeah, he's not even a hipster pick.
Wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably wrong. it's probably wrong. But what would be wrong, I think, is to bet on a complete repeat of an outlier Tampa Bay Bucs 2023 season where kind of just everything went right, including a career Baker Mayfield year. Ian, also with the miracle worker Dave Canales. They now have a new intriguing offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen, who was amazing at the University of Kentucky, a little less so with the Rams, where I think his wings were kind of clipped by Sean McVay, understandably so.
Yeah,
you should not take precedent over Sean McVay, even if you're Liam Cohen. Was that too bearish of a take on this Bucs offense? And do you like them to maybe repeat what they did last year, where they were a stunningly stable and consistent source of fantasy points? Or do you think that the 2023 Bucs are not coming back this year?
I think this is going to be a disaster team. Pat, if they had not beat the Panthers 9-0 in week 18, would Baker Mayfield be the starting quarterback this year? Like, I don't really think so. I mean, Baker was good last year, okay? He was good. He had 2 really nice playoff performances against 2 atrocious secondaries that I think made things look a little bit better. But it's a veteran-laden team that looked like they were 1 season away from tearing the whole thing down, and they had unexpected success in the worst division in football, and now they're trying to run it back. So 20th ranked scoring offense from a year ago. Mike Evans, another year older. Chris Godwin has not looked the same since that 2021 ACL injury. Maybe things get better, but Rachaad White, brutal efficiency. They bring in Bucky Irving now, who has a sort of pass-catching chops to actually make life tougher for Rachaad White in the receiving game. Cade Otton's like the only tight end alive that can play every single snap and still never matter in fantasy land. I mean, dude, I'm not going on my way to draft any of these dudes, really. I feel like I've said a lot of nice things about the teams we've talked about, but yeah, I'll go all in on the Buccaneers, just not really having much of anyone. Like, again, okay, if I'm in round 17, I see Jalen McMillan chilling, 3rd round wide receiver, okay, fine enough. But more times than not, man, answer to which Buccaneer draft, I think it's just no.
I actually do agree with that, even though it's a lot of name brand players, but Mike Evans was amazing. I think like the first half or maybe the middle part of the season last year looked like he was really slowing down the second half. Chris Godwin was kind of the inverse, where I thought Godwin's season was just totally over. Then his wife like posted on Instagram one time and Godwin's season was back on. It just did not seem like a good situation to run back. And
I was surprised how close their targets were by the end of the year, because production wise, you would have just assumed that, Evans completely relegated him to this, to clear number 2 wide receiver. But I think when it was all said and done, Evans had, let's see, I'm pulling it up right now. Fantastic podcasting. Thank you, everyone. Mike Evans, 136 targets, Godwin, 130. So the argument would be that maybe, the disparity in ADP is a bit too wide, but I don't know, man. I see Evans probably falling off just a little bit here. Hopefully he keeps a 1,000-yard season streak going. But yeah, man, look, we've seen Baker have some good years. Okay. Led the Browns' first playoff victory in multiple decades, had the rookie passing touchdown record before Justin Herbert broke it. Like, it didn't completely come out of nowhere, but even last year with everything going great, Baker, it's not like we still felt great about him in fantasy. It's not like we were ranking him as a top 10 QB. Feels like they're really chasing what was ultimately a fairly mediocre team in 2023.
Yeah, you should not chase the career year seasons. And the Bucs, I don't know. I guess the Bucs didn't really have a better option. They did get played into a poor draft pick. They did win a playoff game. I guess it would have been unbecoming to just tear this offense down, this team down, but we don't have to do that in fantasy. In fantasy,
right.
We can't make those judgments. And I don't even know if this last question makes sense. It seemed I said, is Rachaad White the Alvin Kamara of Travis Etienne's? And tell me first off if that makes any sense to you whatsoever. And then if it's true, I'm sorry.
Even though it doesn't make sense to me, I like it. I like where your head was at and what you were trying. But I think Etienne. So with Etienne, at least, if you look at the Jaguars' yards before contact per carry, which I think is more or less an O-line stat, that difference over the last 2 seasons almost entirely makes up for his drop-off. So I think Etienne's a legitimately good running back. White is really good as a receiver. And to be fair, it's not like we have a situation where Josh Jacobs with the Raiders last year, it was weird to me how bad he was. And then Zamir White comes in and has better numbers behind the same O-line. You look at the other Buccaneers running backs, even the last 2 years, no one has been, producing good. And that's not just, Rachaad White. But man, it's just, they didn't even throw the ball to running backs all that often. It was just the fact that White was on the field almost all the time, which I don't think is really, this offense's goal. That's why they took Bucky Irving with a 4th-round pick. So just one of those things, man, where bad off. I mean, this is a dead zone running back, okay? And sometimes the way things are, depending on the draft you're in, these guys start falling to round 6, round 7. Okay, I can wrap my mind more around that. But when I see guys like, again, Rachaad White going in round 4, round 5, no, just give me the freaking baller quarterback or the top 3 tight end, not the running back who we are praying keeps the volume, because we know he's not going to make up for it with efficiency, and he's in an offense that, let's face it, not going to be overwhelming, with the fantasy-friendly goal line opportunities either.
Yeah, it's the classic. If he loses even like 15% of his volume, it's like totally over in fantasy. Like he needs to keep 100% of his volume. And Rachaad White, just as a closing question, we had you on to talk about the Saints, the Falcons, and the Bucs. Any late round guys in particular on these teams you're really into? You don't want to be smirched late round guys. So is there any late round guys in these teams you want to talk up? I mean, I guess Rashid Shaheed already qualifies there.
Yeah, if he counts as pure late round, that's fine. I'll say, I didn't catch the whole Panthers segment you guys are having, but Xavier Legette is the one where I have been, taking him a lot more in these later rounds of the draft. With all due respect to our, true separation king, Diontae Johnson. I mean, 1st-round draft capital. This is a freaking freak among freaks, man. You look at the relative athletic score, and truly, I think he was, I want to say top 10. He's up there, man. God only makes so many dudes that are 215, 220 pounds and can run sub 4.4. I know he had the late career breakout, but Pat, I feel like this happens every couple of years where, because we're now this, 365 days, people study fantasy football and stuff. When guys like Legette, and even you see it with Pearsall and you see it with Jalen Polk as well, the surprise picks who go higher in the draft because the NFL likes them. And guess what? I think the NFL knows more than we do about player evaluation, and we're still just really slow to come back around on them. So with Legette, man, we're talking about someone going after 65 wide receivers who could lead his offense in targets. I mean, it's possible. I favor Diontae, but it's possible. We have Dave Canales, the quarterback whisperer, coming to hopefully help things out. And yeah, I do think there's a good amount of talent there. He went in the 1st round for a freaking reason. So out of, again, all the, just NFC South later round options, I've been going with Legette the most.
Well, and this makes a ton of sense to me. Legette is someone I am out on from an evaluation standpoint or whatever, because They have 4 years, I believe, of nothing before the 5th year break. That does make me very, very suspicious.
Tough.
It also makes me suspicious that South Carolina had 2 games we determined that David Tepper probably witnessed in person. There was a season opening South Carolina game in the Panthers Stadium.
Oh, no.
I believe also their bowl game. So that made me a little suspicious that maybe he ordered the Legette code red. But at the end of the day, you made the most important point. He is literally the wide receiver 66, an underdog. And that's just a very dangerous game to play. It happens every year where there's a first-round receiver or two in real life who just get faded to oblivion in fantasy for one kind of superficial reason or another. And maybe there'll be real reasons with Legette, but that first-round draft capital is just such a powerful thing that you cannot ignore. And yet, take 65 guys over a first-round wide receiver, especially on a team where targets are really up for grabs. It doesn't, even if you don't like the player, you have to like that opportunity with Xavier Legette.
Like Pearsall is a little tougher for me to wrap my mind around because even if he starts and just completely puts Juwan Jennings on the bench, which I think is a little bit unlikely, you're still probably ranking him 5th on this team in targets. Again, Legette, I think a normal person is probably saying 2 if you're a hater, 3 behind Thielen as well. So, yeah, man, sign me up.
Sign up, Ian. Sign up for Fantasy Life, by the way.
Ooh, that's a good call.
Buy our draft guides. They're part of the same bundle. Amazing stuff side by side. Former coworkers, we're working together again. And yeah, we're going to be updating our draft guides all summer. Really, really good stuff. All part of the same package. Really, really good stuff always with Ian Hartitz. Hartitz on Twitter. I'm hoping to see a lot of NCAA football tweets over the next week or 2 from you, Ian.
We'll make it happen. Good catching up with you, brother.
Thanks to Ian. Thank you so much to Mike Kaye from the Charlotte Observer. I'm Patrick Daugherty. I'll be back next week with Denny Carter, who's being allowed back into the United States.